Well, thanks for coming to join us, Joe. So today we have the honor to have Joseph Bonneau to join us. Maybe I can do a little introduction. I mean, all of us watched the video, so you kind of get a sense of what Joe's work covers. But he's also, of course, the author of one of the most cited and most used textbook on cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, etc. And he actually invented the whole notion of VDF, which is a topic we'll cover today. So the topic broadly is about fairness, but we'll spend a fair amount of time covering VDF because it obviously has been one of the most exciting new developments in the whole cryptocurrencies research space. So Joe, yes. We just made you a co-host. Hi.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. It's great to see the class is happening.
Are you in Australia now or in New York?
I'm in New York right now.
I see. So it's not so bad because you've been visiting in Monash, is that right?
Melbourne Uni.
Oh, okay, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was worried that you'll be in a very, very awkward time. So
no, it's a good time.
Great. So shall we get started? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So today we want to talk about fairness, but I think when it comes to fairness, one key concept will be randomness. It seems to be something very important to have. So when we read your VDF work, at least for me, I myself actually am academic too, but I'm a neuroscientist. So as an outsider to computer science, I always feel quite often these solutions to computer science is kind of so clever that you think that people probably come up with the solution and then they look for the question. But my understanding is VDF isn't one of those, right? I thought that you basically engineered it for a purpose that you saw that needed a solution. Can you tell us a bit about that journey?
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of trace the evolution in my thinking. If you look at two shorter papers that I wrote, there was like a 2015 or 16 paper about trying to build beacons off of blockchains, and there was a paper called Proofs of Delay and Randomness Beacons in Ethereum, and that was before we had the VDF idea. So the goal was to have verifiable lotteries, cryptographic lotteries, and we sort of identify. I mean, you can even see in the original beacons paper, we said, well, if you had a hash function that was slow, it would make this more difficult to manipulate. But we, at the time we thought, well, if it's slow, then it will be slow to verify. And it took a couple of years to get to the point where we, slow to verify. Sorry, slow to compute, fast to verify. So yeah, it came out of that specific problem, but there've been, lots of other applications, not just of VDFs, but of some of the techniques developed for VDFs.
Yeah, and once it came out, I thought that the amount of excitement in the space was really kind of amazing. Then the Wasilovsky proof came out like quite shortly after, and then the Peter Sack, and a lot of academics started to work on the problem. You think it's because everyone kind of knew that there was this problem and they really wanted to solve it, or was it somehow driven by the cryptocurrency space too? And how does it come about?
No, I mean, I don't think. I mean, Benjamin Wesolowski was also thinking about similar problems for a couple of years. I mean, he wrote a paper called, the paper is called Random Zoo, Sloth and Unicorn, but, it sort of describes how you can use a VDF, although they didn't have a VDF at the time, to do a multi-party randomness protocol. So, I mean, I think he was interested in it just from the, standpoint of lotteries too. Yeah, I mean, it got a lot of other attention quickly because I think it's rare that you have a problem that's kind of elegant. I mean, the description of VDFs is pretty short. It's an interesting problem you can describe. It has practical applications, and it was, there was a lot of stuff to do. So I think I tell grad students, usually if just 2 of 3 properties of your research area, if it's like kind of technically interesting or elegant, if there's practical applications, and if you can make any progress on the problem, usually you get 2 out of 3 at most, sometimes only 1. So, VDFs came along at the right time, and it was obviously a really fun project for a lot of people to work on. So,
yeah, I can totally appreciate the notion of making something truly random and unhackably random would be very important. But as someone, again, from a naive outsider perspective, all these years I've been using randomized functions in the computer, mostly taking the clock timestamp or something and then passing it through some hash or some complicated function, and usually that has given me enough peace of mind, right? So is it fair to say that the VDF really solved the problem when the fairness of the randomization is really at a pretty high stake, when it's like a lot
Well,
of money is involved?
I mean, you need to make a distinction between two times you need to generate randomness. I mean, one is private randomness, where you only need to convince yourself it's random if you're generating a private key for some crypto system. That's in a sense actually much easier, because you don't have to, most of the time at least, you don't have to prove to anybody else it's random. If you generate your key with bad randomness, it might be insecure, but it's your problem.
Mhm.
In a public randomness application like a lottery, you want everybody to believe it's random, even parties who are at odds with each other. Often, I mean, the ideal is that it's participatory, so that everybody can contribute something to it, and be convinced that they've, as long as their contribution is random, then the result will be. But you don't want anybody to be able to predict it. You don't want anybody to be able to manipulate it. And you need everybody to have consensus on the same value. So that's why it's and it's not even necessarily the stakes. I mean, you can have a lottery that has high stakes or low stakes, but as soon as you have multiple parties involved, who have to mutually produce something random that they're both satisfied the other person couldn't predict, then it's a hard problem, and that's where VDFs are helpful, or at least one way to get there. There's other ways to do it that don't involve VDFs at all. So there's a big design space.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So in your talk, you mentioned about some of these, or you just mentioned too, all these like multi-participant type of solutions to randomness. Actually, one of the students had a question. So Kusik asks about especially the PVSS scheme that you talked about. Is it still susceptible to the last revealer problem as well? So maybe I can paste the question here. That'd be easier.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. I
Yeah.
mean, I should say, like, they're parallel to all the work on VDFs.
Yeah.
There's been a huge amount of work the last 3-4 years on multi-party randomness protocols that don't use VDFs. So that's advanced a lot. There's even one up and running called DRAND. So people can look up DRAND if they're interested. The DRAND is actually running. I mean, you could use it. You could use it if you're running a lottery. It's really the first kind of practically deployed one. I think it has 15 participants who contribute entropy. So it's not open. It's not permissionless. You have to be kind of approved to participate in it. So it's like a couple of universities and companies who run it. So to get back to the student's question, there are, I mean, most of the PVSS type schemes or other kind of like threshold crypto based schemes, they're not susceptible to one last revealer attack. There's usually a threshold, like as long as the last K revealers don't all collude, they can't predict the output. And there's a trade-off there. You can usually tolerate some number of corruptions, and then you sort of need that many honest parties. So the advantage of VDFs, what VDFs really give you is that they can sort of drive that, they can drive the trust model kind of to the limit, where you really only need one honest party. You can have one honest party interacting with everybody else who's dishonest, and the result will still be random and unpredictable. So you can't get as strong of a property out of the PVSS or the crypto-based protocols. Of course, they have the benefit that they don't involve VDFs, so there isn't some slow computation that anybody has to do. So, which has a lot of advantages in practice. They're also just sort of based on more well-accepted crypto problems. You can sort of build them out of zero-knowledge proofs and signatures and things that have been around for a long time, whereas VDFs, are relatively new. I think it would be pretty surprising if, like, the repeated squaring VDFs have some shortcut to compute them, some algorithmic shortcut that's very significant, but there's still like a lot of questions about using VDFs in practice, about how much you can accelerate them with better hardware. So, I'd say like there's a separation that VDF-based protocols give you. They give you better trust properties than the PVSS protocols, but there's some practical costs associated with that, which is probably why they haven't really been done yet. There was kind of a demonstration by the company Starkware that was running on Ethereum for a bit. That's kind of the closest to a practical VDF-based beacon that's been out there. Yeah, you can ask yourself in practice, like the DRAN beacon has, like I said, I think 15 participants. It might be 17 or some other number. And I think it's parameterized so that it's secure as long as something like 3 or 5 of them don't collude. In practice, that's probably pretty good for most purposes. It's probably pretty robust. It's pretty unlikely that many of them will collude to cheat. So, I think it's a fair criticism of the VDF approach for beacons is, do you really need this robust of trust assumptions in practice where everybody is corrupt except for one party? It's a bit extreme.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that might lead into another question too. That is also from a student from within the class, and basically the question was, could a group of malicious participants delay the calculation of the VDF by submitting wrong solutions to try to basically jam it up, and meanwhile try to calculate the real answer? I think that probably would help to clarify a bit about the whole prover verifier setup. Is there the question is basically, is there a single person that is being the verifier that can be jammed up this way?
Well, usually everybody is the verifier because everybody wants to verify the results. There might only be one prover who's computing the VDF. Maybe a couple people do for robustness. But no, the short answer is no. I mean, at least all the VDF constructions that have been proposed, it's the same speed no matter what input you give it. So I've never seen an attack where you can give it some adversarially chosen input that's slower to compute. I can't really see, at least with the VDFs we know about it, it doesn't seem like you could come up with that.
I guess maybe helpful to clarify. Basically, this is not, I mean, the proofs so far we've seen are not interactive proofs, right? They are basically proofs via the fiat shimmer, and so there isn't a bottleneck per se that someone needs to interact and try to verify the proof.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's computing the proof and there's computing the VDF. So, but both of those should be. I mean, it's a very slow constant time, but it's basically a constant time. I mean, it's constant with respect to what specific input you choose.
Yeah, and a couple of students I think have this similar question that I think everybody sometimes worry about as computers are getting faster and faster. I saw that in some other of your talks you mentioned this very nice, interesting property that basically computers are not really getting faster per se. The clock speed has basically been kind of plateaued, and your iPhone is almost as good as a really fast computer. They're just more parallel. And because of the way VDF makes sure that the computation has to be sequential, so the parallelism, the GPUs don't really help you. But is there some work on how quantum computers might come into play, and like totally different hardware eventually might be able to do something much faster?
Yeah, so I think there's two questions there. So yeah, first, would quantum computers make a difference? Well, there's certain types of VDFs that have a trusted setup that the quantum computers can reverse. So if you're doing repeated squaring modulo n for an RSA number where you assume nobody knows the factors, quantum computers can can factor. So they can then you wouldn't use a quantum computer to compute the VDF, you'd use it to factor in, and then a classical computer could compute the VDF really quickly. So most VDF schemes aren't quantum secure. The one that was actually in our original paper, if it's possible to make that quantum secure if you use a post-quantum proof system. So the Starkware team did a VDF that's post-quantum. So it is possible to do a post-quantum VDF, but the sort of more elegant constructions are not. So quantum computers overall, I don't think are a really big problem for VDFs. The other nice thing about VDFs is that you usually only care about them for a short period of time. So if a quantum, if we're running a lottery today that uses a VDF that's not quantum secure, it's as soon as the lottery is over, it doesn't matter if someone invents a quantum computer 5 seconds later, which is not really true for like public key encryption, where you care about your secrets being kept for a long time, and you have to worry like if a quantum computer becomes practical in the next 50 years, maybe that's you wouldn't want them to be able to go back in time and decrypt messages, or not go back in time, but look back at the record and decrypt messages. So overall, I think quantum computers aren't too big of a concern for VDFs. It's always better to have a post-quantum secure if you can. The second part of the question was other types of computers, not quantum computers, that might have a faster clock speed. Yeah, that's probably the trickiest part in practice, because most cryptographers don't ever worry about fast clock speeds. In fact, like most hardware engineers don't really worry. It's a very, very niche area of building electronics, because it's not that we don't know how to make computers that run at a faster clock speed than 3 gigahertz or whatever whatever my laptop is doing right now. We just hit the point in the cost curve where you get more performance for your money by having parallelism rather than eking out a little bit of extra clock speed. Usually there's kind of a decreasing returns to, if you spend twice as much on your chip, you can't make it run twice as fast, like not even close. It gets more and more expensive to eke out an extra 2% clock speed increase. So I mean, that's kind of why you don't see laptops on the market that have faster and faster clock speeds every year. But it is possible if you have a really big budget, and I'm very far from an expert here, but you can use different types of semiconductors besides silicon that are more expensive, and but they might have a faster clock speed. So there are some, they're usually called, exotic semiconductors, but as far as I know, that really just means anything but silicon. That can be used to build chips with really fast clock speed. It's just kind of a weird area. There aren't that many applications for it, so there aren't that many people who work in it. And like I said, I'm not an expert. The whole kind of VDF concept, I think, needs it needs more attention from experts on specialized high clock speed hardware to really have a good estimate of how fast things can be made to run. But usually if you're going to deploy a VDF in applications, you just have to make some assumption about how much faster a well-funded attacker can run. So sometimes in later VDF papers, there's this parameter called like A sub max, which is kind of how much faster the attacker can go than the honest party. And if you assume the attacker can compute the VDF twice as fast for most purposes, that's okay. You can sort of build in a safety factor and be fine. You just have to have like some reasonable upper bound on what that is. Mm-hmm. But like I said, it's that's probably the most unexplored part of VDFs and using them in practice.
Mm-hmm. Is it in part? I can see that eventually this would change, right? I mean, depends on the development of the field. If all major cryptocurrencies are secured by VDFs, which means that we have trillions of dollars of worth of stealable money on the market. If someone can be motivated enough to hack it, then I suppose some people might be motivated enough to start to build those hardware. But to the extent that it's not even a thing yet,
Yeah.
except for like DARPA, I don't think anyone would have the budget to do this at the point, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like if you build it, they will attackers will come usually, but yeah, but I mean, trillions of dollars on VDFs, that's probably far in the future. So, and you can usually set up the problem so they have to make the VDF run 10x faster or something, and there's a certain point, like if you need a chip to run at like 30 gigahertz clock speed, where people will tell you like, well, that's never been done, maybe we don't even know how to do it. So, the budget you would need gets pretty astronomical.
And so along the same line, so the hardware attack will look probably not something we have to worry for now. But how about the software, the algorithmic side? Am I right that so the VDF looks like is a very secure framework, right? You block the parallelism and you make sure it has to be sequential. But there is no actual mathematical proof to say that had whatever the verifier cannot have some hack that can actually so the prover do not have some hack to do it quicker, right? There's no mathematical proof to guarantee that there is not such a algorithm. It's just that it's hard to think of one yet.
Yeah, it's pretty unlikely that we get such a proof because, well, again, there's a lot of different VDF constructions, so some of them might be provable. The sort of the most well-known one, which is repeated squaring mod n. Proving that is slow is, we know that if you can factor n, then you can compute it quickly. So you'd have to prove that factoring is hard, which is an open mathematical problem for centuries. So pretty unlikely that VDFs are going to motivate a proof. That's been an open problem in crypto for a long time. We'd like to, there could be speedups on computing squaring mod n that don't require factoring n. So it would be a really great research result if somebody could prove that computing a VDF, in fewer than t steps actually leads to a factoring attack. If you could show that those problems are equivalent, that would be really, really good, because then we'd say, well, this is at least as hard as factoring, and we know that's hard. We don't have that right now. Maybe we'll never come up with it. The best proof we have today is that repeated squaring is it's hard in something called the strong algebraic group model, which is kind of a abstraction of doing arithmetic mod n. So that's kind of as far as the security reduction is able to go. But basically, it's an assumption, which cryptographers do all the time. I mean, factoring is an assumption, discrete log is an assumption. Yeah, for repeated squaring VDFs, the assumption is just that there's no shortcut to computing a very large exponent besides repeated squaring. And then that might stay as an assumption, for our entire lives. We might never prove that it's equivalent to any other problem. It might just be its own problem that we believe is hard because it's been sitting around for a long time and nobody's made any progress on it.
Yeah, I think we cover the basics of at least the theoretical aspects. Maybe we can move on to talk a bit about the tooling. So you mentioned that like Startware has been quite leading in this and have a randomness beacon that is actually up and running. And do you know of if someone like just a Solidity programmer who just build applications, who don't build infrastructure and etc., who want to try to get their hands on implementing a VDF in their application, what do you think would be the way to go? Is it still quite challenging?
So I should say, the Starkware VDF, I think that was up and running for a while as a demo. I don't think it's running anymore, but it's been implemented, so I think the code's available. I've seen a couple of implementations on GitHub of repeated squaring and verifying Wesolowski proofs and solidity. So like it does exist. People have implemented it, but I don't know specifically which library to use. I don't think there's anything like a standard right now.
And
but it's also, I mean, it's especially if you have if you have a big int library in Solidity that that you like or is close to standard, it's I would say just a good project to go implement Wesolowski or Peter-Zak proofs yourself. They're not super complicated. It's not like a lot of code. So
yeah, and I mean, is it fair to say like most of the applications I've seen mostly at the infrastructure level? So let's say consensus protocols and all of this, it would be good to have some very good randomness built in. But do you see some applications of this kind of VDF backed randomness in applications too?
I mean, I've seen it proposed. I can't remember the name of the guys that were trying to do this, but I've seen it proposed as a mechanism against front running,
Yes.
where you have to submit orders and you have to show that you've computed a VDF on top of your order to show that you didn't just make it up, based on an order you saw somebody else trying to submit. So that might be like an application level thing. I mean, also just anything that's not implemented today in Ethereum, if you want to do a lottery with VDFs, you have to do the VDF application layer. So
yeah.
I mean, in the future, I guess for like ETH 2.0, there's going to be like the beacon chain. So you maybe if you just want random numbers, you can get them from the blockchain itself.
I was wondering, can the notion of randomness be applied to other aspects? Like I've seen that Filecoin and Chia both has this the proofs, they call it like proof of space. Mm-hmm. And is the idea related to PDF and VDFs too? And
yeah, I mean, so there are, I mean, in our original VDF paper, we talk about some connections between proofs of space and VDFs and how you can use them basically to show that you've there's a couple of different ways to use them. I mean, and Chia uses them for another purpose too, which is to do what they call a proof of space and time, which is not just that you've are storing the data you claim, but you've been storing it for some specific period of time. So there are a lot of connections there, and there've even been some kind of like spin-off papers that try to combine the two. So
yeah, actually, in 2 weeks we'll have Shashank Argo who come here will talk a bit about that kind of proof. So that's a nice connection for this. Maybe I should open it up for others to ask questions too. I've spoken for some time. So for those in the class who have questions, you can just paste it up or just turn on your mic. Yeah, we usually don't have a large live class because of the semi-asynchronous and international nature. The videos sometimes get, I mean, not sometimes, we know that they get watched offline a lot, but during the live class, we don't have such a large audience. If not, I have some other questions too. We can move on to the next part. Okay, well, let's try that. So yeah, I have some other questions about the maybe more broadly about the topic of fairness, if you don't mind, about how voting and anti-collusion. Do you see some applications of how randomness or other gadgets that are available in the space that might apply to those as well, to make voting more fair and make collusion harder?
Well, yeah, I mean, collusion is a big topic, I guess. I'm not sure I have much to say about that. There's definitely like an application of randomness protocols to voting that you, after an election, you want to do a randomized audit, a risk limiting audit usually. So that's like a pretty direct connection. There's proposals for voting too, where you called sortition, where you randomly select a group of people to be able to vote on something. So that's It's a really old idea that the ancient Greeks were doing it. It hasn't been done on a large scale really since, as far as I know. But people mention that sometimes. So yeah, I mean, I think that in general, there are a lot of situations where random selection of something is the most fair way to do it. Usually, if you're trying to allocate some limited resource that is indivisible, something like a seat in a university or an immigration visa or say like an assignment of a judge to a specific case, anything like that, random selection, you can argue is a fair way to do it. So I think there is like a pretty deep connection of randomness to fairness.
Yeah, I can see the sortition case, even though I know is old and hasn't been so actively used in actual political societies. But I can see that for DAOs, it could be a very useful thing because everyone talks about DAO fatigue, and
Yeah.
I don't go and vote on every proposal because studying them is some work. So once you think about that, then perhaps if I do get to have to vote, I should be paid some money. But you can't pay the whole community some money to vote, then basically it wouldn't work. But you can still, if you
Yeah.
randomly select a few members and pay them to study the proposals, and that
Well,
could
and I
be.
think you can see like a lot of consensus protocols as basically doing something like sortition, where they randomly select either one party or a committee that will choose blocks or add to the ledger for some limited period of time, and get kind of like an exclusive right. And um, the idea philosophically is pretty similar. It's kind of you could have like Byzantine consensus with every participant
Mhm.
um, over over every single block, but that's usually too expensive. So it's easier to just randomly pick somebody and say, they generate the next block and then randomly pick somebody else. So it's pretty similar, I think, to sortition.
Mhm. And certainly for what we do at Harmony, we are a layer one sharded consensus mechanism. So it's same for Ethereum 2.0 too. At some point, you need to reshard and reshuffle
Mm-hmm.
people. Otherwise, they know who are the leaders and who are within my shard, then they can start colluding. So all these reshuffling purposes, given how much is at stake, I can see that something like VDF can come in handy to make sure that things are truly random.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I on the issue of voting and collusion, I have one more problem. I'm not sure. Probably is not a VDF question per se, but just a crypto problem. So I think it's very easy to prove that someone is the same person. Like if you voted something and you want to say, well, you are the person who actually also made these transactions. To connect the two is relatively easy. I can use all these public private key pairings and make sure the
Mm-hmm.
same person. But is there some way to make sure that one actual human being doesn't actually have multiple identities on chain?
Yeah,
That's
well,
hard.
this is, I mean, there's people thinking about this. It's called like proof of personhood or proof of humanity.
Yeah.
So there's some proposals out there. I'm not really an expert on the details. Yeah, it's definitely like it would be a really big breakthrough, I think, if we had a practical way to do it. That I mean, that doesn't rely on the government or the phone company or somebody else, which are kind of the proxies that we use today, giving out credentials to humans. So I'm a little bit pessimistic that is ever going to really get off the ground and be something that people want to do. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to be proven wrong. It would be I mean, there'd be a ton of applications, I think, if we could do it.
Yeah, I'm aware of one project called the I think World Coin. They're trying to basically incentivize people to prove their human identity
Mm.
by promising everyone get a certain airdrop of a coin, or maybe not even airdrop, a fair drop of a coin. So but they require them to actually scan the iris, the pupil, the eye, the retina,
Mm.
and I think that seems to not sit well with everything about crypto. Like it seems very. I mean, I don't. I mean, I think they promised to use zero knowledge technology to protect the privacy, but it still seems to be a lot of information to give out.
Yeah, yeah, and people have cultural feelings about eyes specifically and revealing their eyes. So that's always it's always tough, even though it's a very good biometric. So yeah, it's I think it'd be tough to have get the whole planet. And also this is kind of standard problems with biometrics, but there's human beings without eyes. So you have to come up with a scheme for everybody. So
yeah, but that could be quite so to the extent that we can't really prove is a one person, one account, or one person, one wallet situation, then the sortition and all these would also in some ways be compromised, right? So if I just want to increase my representation in the voting process, all I need to do is just to create 100 accounts. So even though we can be guaranteed that the sortition is completely random, but I have 100 more representatives, then it would still be a bit of a problem, right?
Yeah, if you're doing sortition, I mean, it doesn't solve the problem of Sybil resistance exactly. So you either need to have it, proof of stake or proof of work, or some form of proof of personhood that people can live with.
Okay, I see a question from a student too. Pran was just thinking aloud. Are there any applications based on randomness of thoughts? Maybe you need to elaborate a bit. What do you mean by randomness of thoughts? Hi, Pran. So, are you trying to see like how you can predict the in an adversarial situation how random your opponent can generate something or something?
Subconscious neural signals. I mean, you can also turn on your mic if you want, Pran, if it's easier to explain. I must say I don't totally know what to say.
I think I know something that might be related to this. Let me see if I can try. But it's not really VDF related. But I knew that. So Joe, you worked with Dan Bonneau at Stanford, right? That's when you actually invented the VDF formalism. I think Dan Bonneau has a paper that requires something like that. Yes, I can share it here. It's quite quite a surprising paper for me. I think it's something about the fact that we can actually, let me try not to butcher it, but let me share a paper here. I think it's something about something called Roper host attack. So it's the worry that what if someone just point a gun at you and asks you to type out your or tell your password, and turns out that there's a way to use people's implicit learning so that they can learn to dial a sequence without actually consciously knowing what the sequence was.
Yeah, I mean, that's a cool paper. It's a bit, I'm not sure there's much of a connection to VDFs.
I'm also worried that how practical would it be? Because if the person just point his gun at my head and ask me to actually type it instead of say it, then at some point even my subconscious information can leak out from the motor.
Well, I think the idea is the person pointing a gun wouldn't be able to give you the same stimulus to get the response out of you. But yeah, once they could, then I think they would learn it. So
yeah. And then another question from CKD, kind of off topic. What are some of the reasons that you decided to go into cryptography? Yeah, that's good. Let's chat about. I know that you have a long history in this too, right? You first wrote your textbook before you went to Stanford. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, I was a Stanford undergrad too, so let's let you explain. I first went to Stanford. Wow, it's hard to believe I showed up at Stanford almost 20 years ago as an undergrad. So I mean, I was interested in cryptography even when I was an undergrad. There was no Bitcoin, no cryptocurrency. And, I just thought it was interesting. The I took Dan Bonnet's class when I was an undergrad, and it was my favorite class. So, I was lucky I was able to work with him as a master's student, work with him as a postdoc. So in that sense, probably, a classic story. I was interested. I had a great teacher that inspired me and started, learning about things on my own. So, when I guess I was, I was fortunate, I guess, that I'd studied cryptography before cryptocurrency, came along. So, like a lot of other people, it was a great thing for kind of existing people who knew something about cryptography to go into. But yeah, I mean, um, it's I think most of the best things have happened in cryptocurrency by people who thought they were interesting and didn't, do it primarily for the money. So it's changed a lot. I mean, I think a lot of people are, nobody went into cryptography in 2006 or 7 when I was getting interested, because they thought it was the path to riches. And obviously that's changed a bit. It's been, sometimes it's sad to see how the field has, changed a bit as a result. Maybe sometimes it's a bit less friendly or a bit less communal. When people are like competing for dollars, maybe, much bigger amount of dollars. But yeah, I mean, in general, I think if you're to anybody, if you're interested in something and you're able to study it and able to hopefully find a way to support yourself doing it, that's usually the it's usually a good way to go. If rather than trying to optimize for exactly what's going to be the hot career field, 5 or 10 years down the road when you're sort of hitting your peak career. So yeah, I always tell students to focus on what they think is the most interesting, and hopefully everything else will fall into place from there.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I'd be probably around the same age. I do remember like when I was a postdoc, also trying to just chat with computer scientists because I studied brain. So all the computer science language is a very useful way for me to basically soup up my research or basically inform the models of the brain. And I do remember people were just saying that the most exciting things that were happening in computer science, to a number of them, would be cryptography. And back then there was like no money. It is not clear that there's money in it. I mean, I think it's in a way better than basic biomedical research. At least you can probably find a job if you become a really good cryptographer. But nobody expected how things turned. Do you feel that in some ways it's a bit like how machine learning or the current wave of AI happened in about 10 years ago as well? Suddenly for a while it was pretty dead, right? When AI has went into winter a couple of times, and then 10 years ago suddenly it exploded, and with the money, then it brought in all these industry people and lots of opportunities, but also changed the culture of the research a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work in machine learning. Sometimes I'm embarrassed by how little I know about machine learning, given how important it is now. But yeah, I mean, it's similar. I mean, it's maybe hotter than cryptocurrency even. I mean, I actually think for a grad student or a PhD student, if you study machine learning, who knows how long the boom will last, but it's just kind of, guaranteed you get like a huge offer from all these companies and everybody wants to hire machine learning experts. So maybe it's, even more hot field than cryptocurrency. But I think that a similar thing to what I'd say, I mean, I don't know the history as well. I do know, like, at NYU, I've gotten to meet Jan LeCun a couple of times, who's a Turing Award winner now for his machine learning contributions. And, as I understand the story anyway, I mean, he stuck with machine learning because he was, truly interested in it when nobody was paying attention. And it didn't seem like it was clear it would ever be a hot topic again. So, I think that's often true that if you really, if you want to do something really great and impactful in the world, you have to be willing to stick through it when, nobody is paying attention to the area you're working on. And, it could be the case with proof of personhood now, because it's a relatively niche topic within cryptocurrency space. And sometimes it's one that, some people say like it's not ever going to happen and is, fundamentally impractical. But who knows? I mean, in 10 years, the people who are working on proof of personhood, we might say like, oh yeah, they're the ones who really moved the world forward by, putting in the time on, while everybody else was focused on cryptocurrency and proof of stake or whatever, they went after something they because they liked the idea, and and there you go. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's
so just kind of a nerdy way of saying pursue your passions, because you never know where the future's going to go.
yeah, and especially I think in a field where even if you don't become super well known or wealthy, at least if a field looks like that, you can do research and just make a living, and that's already a huge privilege. In fact,
Yeah.
you mentioned about Ian LeCun, and who, by the way, if you don't know, he's the head of Facebook AI research right now.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we have a bit of a connection there in some ways. My first job was at Columbia University, so I was in Manhattan, and around from 2007 and 2011, yeah, 2011. So for a few years, I was in New York City, and actually, I was on the same grant proposal with Ian LeCun at some point. So we put a grant proposal together, and Ian LeCun was doing what my friends would call connectionist modeling. That was before deep learning become the buzzword, and I think Ian basically started doing it in his PhD and just stuck with it, and he saw a lot of promise in it, even when people were just laughing at all these dead connectionist models, and now they are not laughing anymore. Yeah, so these things can change.
I mean, I guess it hasn't had, obviously VDFs have not had the same impact on the world as deep learning, but it was a mini version that in 2015 and 16, when I gave some talks and tried to tell people, this VDF is a really interesting problem area, and it was I definitely saw the idea get dismissed quite a few times as sort of not interesting or not possible. And so fortunately it was not nearly as like long or difficult of a road, but that was my own personal mini version of it. So I'm glad to see VDFs are a topic people want to cover in classes now.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a VDF Alliance, right? There's a huge group of researchers, and how much of it was also funded by the industry, by the cryptocurrency industry? And
well, the VDF Alliance, as I understand it, it's the main goal is to raise some money to build VDF hardware. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what the current status is actually of that project, but most of the VDF research has been just funded by academics from their usual grants and sources. So it's kind of been organic in that sense. But then, Ethereum Foundation, Filecoin, Chia, they've sponsored contests, and they've done some grants and things to develop some parts of VDF. So there's been some industry funding in that sense, but the main original papers, I think, just came kind of naturally out of academics working on stuff they thought was interesting.
Does this sometimes interfere with your graduate supervision work? That's graduate students being in such an attractive, lucrative, sometimes they would drop out, or
no, I've had almost like 50% attrition among PhD students, because well, it's a small sample, but it's I don't really I mean, if I'm working with a student who likes industry projects and can go, and the thing is, like, most of the time they're still doing research, so I don't have a strong bias that you have to be in a PhD program or a university to be doing research. I mean, I think a lot of companies are doing research. So, I mean, we've seen a ton of research come out of, lots of companies in this space. Yeah, I think it's just as valid. So for, any student who can maybe get paid more, have more upside, and be doing worthwhile research in a company setting, I say, like, go for it if that's what you want to do. And I value the university system too, but it's to me it's a good problem to have if students have really good options to work in industry.
Definitely a good problem, because as a neuroscientist, we often have the opposite problem that students drop out because they see no future, that there are not enough faculty positions for them. And the industry, I mean, basically, if they move to industry, it would involve quite a switch in training that they feel they might as well do it earlier, instead of spending 20 years and then just to realize that there's no job in sight.
Right.
So Kusek has a different question again on the repeated squaring VDF. Yes, actually, yeah. How are the parameters T and N chosen? Joe, you can see the question there too.
Yeah, I can see the question. So N is usually chosen by a trusted setup. So there's some ways to do that as a multi-party trusted setup, but somebody has to choose two large primes, P and Q, multiply them together to get N, and then throw P and Q away. If anybody knows P and Q, then it's not a VDF anymore. So that's, the tricky part is choosing N. It could just be done sort of once and reused for any application. But yeah, there's was some cool work on doing that as a multi-party computation. So you don't need to trust one party, you just have to trust that the majority of the participants are honest. And T is application specific. So, depending on depending on what application you're doing and what assumptions you make about network latency, maybe, you might want a T that, usually you don't think about choosing T, but you try to choose some real world delay. Like, we don't want any adversary to compute the VDF in less than 10 minutes or less than 24 hours or sort of whatever you want. And then you can estimate the minimum T that you need using that time that you're going for. And like I said, that usually depends on some network model of, how much time you need to make sure everybody can submit their contribution. And then, T needs to be long enough that it can't be computed in that time period.
Okay. If there are no more questions, may I ask one last general thing? So usually we set the time to run till 11:15. And I think just a trick to make sure that people don't book up a meeting for the next hour. But usually we don't need to end exactly, just sit out the time. But I have one last question that isn't about VDF, but it's about CK in general, since we kind of move on to talk a bit about the industry. So of course, one of the I think zero knowledge proof has become really has gone under the spotlight for a lot of the reason is for the succinctness properties of CK proofs, right? So it basically becomes a compression and scaling solution for a lot of cryptocurrency protocols. And then of course fairness is another use case, but the original, I think the vision, I think the obvious use case is actually privacy, that people would think that this is what it's really for. You can prove that you have some information without revealing it. Do you worry that is a bit of a double-edged sword for the space? So as things become more private, I think it's good, but people don't seem to care a lot about the privacy in some ways. We all click agree to all these agreements when we use Google and Facebook and all these companies and just give away our information. And as people do get to learn to keep the information more private, do you worry that the government regulations against cryptocurrency might become more strict because they're more criminal?
That's one of the oldest questions, not just about zero knowledge, but about cryptography in general. It can be used, it can be used for bad purposes. It can be used for good purposes. Yeah, I mean, to, I guess, put my cards on the table. I mean, I was a technology fellow at EFF and worked with them and been a supporter for years. I tend to be of the camp that privacy is a good thing and that it will be used more for good purposes than for ill purposes. That's my personal belief. Yeah, I definitely worry all the time that governments will overregulate cryptocurrencies or try to regulate away people's right to privacy. And I think there's a lot of other reasons why governments might try to stymie cryptocurrencies. I mean, it could be just that they want control of money or monetary policy. It could be, influence of the existing players, the existing, banking or finance infrastructure. So I don't know practically if privacy will be the is the biggest threat in terms of like attracting unnecessary regulation. But yeah, it's definitely it's a concern I have. I think most people in the field have.
Yeah, because in a way the smearing has already happened, where whichever side it came from. A lot of people, when I told them about Bitcoin or NFT, the first thing that they would say is, "Oh, these are for money laundering and ransoms." And given that there is actually no data supporting it, in fact, there is data supporting quite the contrary. Most of those illegal activity now take place with actually dollar bills, but regardless, that narrative seems to have already been quite strong, and added on top some really guaranteed privacy. I do worry that the image might start to play into that smearing narrative.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, always good to, I guess, promote the value of privacy and say it's a good thing and it's a natural thing that people should want privacy. So normalizing that's a good thing.
Yeah, agree. So thanks so much. We almost talked for an hour. Thanks so much for spending your time with us. Even though this is hopefully the timing isn't so awkward for you.
Yeah, no.
I was really worried for a bit that you'll be in Australia. Then I would feel really a big one. Yeah, but you're traveling today too, right? You said.
Yeah, not anymore actually. So
good to know. Yeah. So hope you have the good rest of the day. So thank you so much again.
Okay.
I hope we'll
see you.
All right. Thank you, class, as well.
All right. Bye, everybody. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.